to introduce you to Lisa Lidgus from the St. Louis Zoo. Lisa is a conservation education liaison and has worked at the St. Louis Zoo for 16 years. With a BA in zoology, her background on both conservation education and animal husbandry, that's an interesting word, led her into the field of exhibit design. Here's Lisa. Let me just, yeah. Speak. Let's see. She puts it on this way. Yeah, thank you.
All right, thanks for having me. I am beyond honored to be here and be presenting with such a distinguished panel. So what does this all look like? What does this all look like at the St. Louis Zoo? So I first wanted to kind of introduce the whole concept with our overarching goal for the exhibit. Then the space behind there you see is actually the dedicated space to our First Voices approach. We have interpretation on the outside as well, as Adrian was mentioning, with a snowmobile and a boat. But the building is kind of where it's at and where everything is held. And it is modeled after an underground Inupiaq home. And so the overall goal initially was really, I mean, it's long and it seems hefty, but really it's just about shifting the climate change discussion, just moving it a little bit, because it's kind of got stuck in a way when it came to zoos interpreting climate change. And this way we're actually inviting visitors to be a part of the conversation, to actually look at if we can open a door to real action. So as Adrian and as Jack had discussed, we went to rural Alaska in 2014, in the fall of 2014, and we visited 5 different villages, all of which were members of the Nanuuq Commission and partners with the Nanuuq Commission. And my role, as they discussed, was to engage the students and to work with the students. And again, with my background, this was, the opportunity of a lifetime to be able to travel to these places and meet the students and work with the students and highlight the work that the zoo does in Africa, the conservation work that the zoo does in Africa. And it was a great way to engage the students, because most of these students have not been to a zoo to see a lion or a giraffe that so many zoo visitors take for granted. But it was also a way to introduce the zoo as a whole, as a conservation organization, more than just a menagerie. So it was really great. We did videos, and the kids loved the biofacts. It was just great. And I got to meet with every student at every school, which was also really fun too. We also held community meetings at everywhere we went. And this was a chance for all of the community members that were interested in this project and what we were proposing to come in and just ask questions and get feedback. We showed them the blueprints of the exhibit so they would see where everything would go and where videos would be shown. And I also brought the biofacts and discussed what I was doing with the kids. And this was a huge learning moment for me, because not at all coming from a subsistence background, usually when visitors to the zoo pick up these items, they talk about how soft they are or what the spots are for. But pretty much every community member that picked up an item immediately started telling me what it could be used for and how it could be used. And so I learned that cheetah pelt would make really great mittens. That was a huge consensus across communities. So that was a really cool learning experience for me. So part of the work, the main work that Adrian was mentioning that first year in 2013 into 2014 with Jack, was really just working with the Nanuuq Commission's commissioners and community members to really look at what would they want out of this opportunity, what would they want from these videos. So these 3 themes were what was put together, kind of that loose structure that Jack was referring to. But it was also made very clear that involving the students in creating the video journals and giving them those opportunities, any skill building opportunities as possible, was a major priority. So that was something we really focused on as well. And these types of steps were really, really critical in making sure this whole process, that the communities had full ownership over the videos and over what they produce. And so this this process, when we went up in 2014, took about 3.5 weeks, and in spring of 2015, we found out that Wales, Alaska, which is just on the western tip of continental Alaska in the Bering Sea, they wanted to create the first video. And so I traveled up there with Rosie Robards of the Alaska Team Media Institute, which is, they're the folks connecting Jack right now. And we went up there to provide any tech support and just work with the kids. And Rosie is absolutely phenomenal. I know Kelly will sing her praises when she comes up. She's absolutely incredible, and she did such a great job mentoring the students. So by the time that we were done, we were there for about a week. By the time that we were done, the students had written all of the interview questions. So we basically gave the students those 3 themes and said, how do you want to ask these questions? How do you want to ask them of your aunts, your uncles, your mom, your dad, your grandparents? And they conducted all of the interviews. They filmed everything. I made my job actually pretty easy because I just got to sit back and watch. They ran all the sound, so they did the miking, and they shot all the B-roll photography and videography. So it was a busy week. We told the kids to go home once they felt ready, once they felt prepped, they go home, tell everybody the zoo's back. We're here again. And if you'd like to do an interview, please come in. And we had pretty much a revolving door for about 3 or 4 days. And this picture really says it all. It's not of good quality. I just snapped it on my phone because it's the only thing, one of the few times I actually thought to take a picture, because I was so engrossed for days in witnessing the most incredible storytelling and lesson sharing I've ever seen. It's probably one of the coolest weeks of my life, one of the most amazing weeks of my life. Because through this connection between the students and the interviewees, many of which were relatives of these students, I felt a part of the conversation, and I felt invited in to what they were discussing rather than just a cold question, answer. And through this connection that is created through this video, everyone who watches it is invited into their conversation. So, and it's also really important to note before I show you the video that all of the footage and everything that was collected, all the B-roll, the hours and hours and hours that these students created or collected, all belong to the Native Village of Wales. It's theirs. There's a hard drive with everything that they can access through Alaska Team Media Institute, or the zoo has one too, at any time. And it was not shown to the public or displayed anywhere until everyone in the village that needed to saw it and gave its approval. And any adjustments that ever need to get made are all done through approval, with the approval from the Wales Tribal Council. So, without further ado, I present the whales, hopefully. I'll let it take a minute.
No place like Alaska, no place is like home. I mean, I've traveled pretty much all over. I've been down the lower 48. I went as far as Spain and Copenhagen, and home is home.
With the internet, it seems like the world is getting a lot smaller, but at the same time, we're still just as isolated as we were, because we'll still go weeks without airplanes to bring in supplies or mail.
So we still rely a lot on our native food, and we're trying to keep it so the next generation, like my grandchildren, continue to harvest that food.
It's kept Wales people alive for thousands of years.
Once it gets to where we have 16, 18, 24 hours of daylight, once we get to where it starts to warm up, the only place I want to be is out there on the ocean, on the ice, with my uncles, with my cousins, with everyone in the village.
To me, it's a lot healthier, it's fresher, and it's available still right now. Bears are edible. They're considered now a delicacy because we don't often hunt polar bears here anymore. Through the Nanuuq Commission here in Alaska, they showed our culture a lot of respect, but they also let us know what was happening to the polar bears' environment and why they were becoming endangered. We started to see some of our elders slow down in hunting polar bears for that reason. And I was really glad to see that happen.
I was taught, don't kill any animals unless you need it.
It's our nature to see polar bears. We live out here in the Arctic. We're supposed to see polar bears.
Polar bears could smell for miles. They've known to smell a dead walrus or a dead whale 10 miles away from them. That's how they hunt. Their nose is how they survive.
A lot of the stories I heard growing up is that polar bears are smart, a lot smarter than most people. According to legend and according to the stories my elders told me, is that they will even understand our language. If there's a bear bothering us, we need to talk to it in our language. Maybe the first thing I would tell it in my language is, "Adapilin, go away." That means, get away from here.
They're prized, they're respected, we have dances about them, we have stories about them.
Polar bears are just natural. I mean, they're part of our lives.
If we want bears for our next generation, we got to start thinking about trying to save them. And I think it's really important to save their environment.
Over 40 years ago, we told scientists that our ice was thinner, but they didn't believe us until the scientists studied the ice conditions up here, and now everybody knows that our ice is thinner and our climate is getting warmer.
The people who live here know about our climate, know about living in these conditions, and we share these conditions with the polar bear.
Like with the warmness of our weather, we're having a late fall, and our spring comes real fast.
We get bad weather all the time now, quick. We have south wind. It used to take days to change from south to north wind. Either way, the land or the ocean side, it would take days. Now it's just a matter of minutes.
And I'm sure it affects the polar bears out there. The changes are not stopping, so we need to be concerned about our environment and the polar bears' environment also.
I don't like the change.
Okay, so that is the video that is currently showing at Polar Bear Point, McDonnell Polar Bear Point at the zoo. But at the time when this was created, so we had this incredible video that when we first showed it to a lot of people at the zoo, you know, there were definite tears because it's extremely moving. And so now that we had that, it was time to attempt to equip our in-person interpretation staff and volunteers. Interpretation at the zoo it's a bit more than just interpreting that a leopard has spots to help it camouflage. It's interpretation, whether it's from a docent, a paid interpreter, or a keeper. It's about speaking for the animals on their behalf and in some ways telling their stories. The backbone of zoo interpretation is often correct information plus proper messaging presented in an effective way. So turning all of that on its head and asking hundreds of docents and staff to accept the challenge of becoming comfortable letting somebody else tell the story. Taking a step back and let someone else tell the story was exciting, but also terrifying at the same time. It's always important for people on the front lines, whether you're a museum or a zoo, to feel equipped and comfortable. But for this process, it was more about needing them to be empowered and feel empowered. Empowered to take on this challenge and kind of let their guard down just a little bit to see what amazing things can happen when they just let a conversation happen rather than reading a script or reciting a script. So this slide is actually right out of my training that I give to all of our volunteers and staff that work at Polar Bear Point. And it's just my attempt at empowering them and giving them some guidance as much as possible with something that is so fluid. And the hundreds of staff and volunteers really took a leap of faith in me. I couldn't give them a handbook or instructions, but I could give them really important interpretive parameters that we established with Jack and with our community partners. And I could give them the video, and I could give them our goals, and just suggestions on ways that they can wrap their minds around just what they're being challenged to do. And they still had a polar bear to talk about too and compete with, because he is extremely active. So it was a lot going on, but it was pretty incredible. And every one of those folks were invited on this journey, and eventually we really became a learning community together in this whole process. So research, really quickly, I just want to mention how the way that everything was developed was with research in mind. So as Jack and Adrian discussed, this was a dynamic exhibit from the beginning. We offered this to as many communities that wanted to make a video, that wanted to have that connection and megaphone to St. Louis, and we average about 3 million people a year. So the research was really critical to making sure that we're always improving and we're always adjusting based on the needs of everybody, essentially. So we collected visitor surveys, we collected observational data using cameras, and we actually surveyed all of our people working on the front lines, the interpretation front lines. And when it came to our visitors, there weren't a ton of surprises. As you saw on the very first slide, the monitors were all up, and there was no seating or comfortable place for people to sit and just watch the video. So that was kind of something we knew right off the bat could help more people watch the video and watch it for longer. Our hold rates were not great. So we put in this temporary, we kept calling it the Nook, Kelly designed Nook. And no surprise, when we used our observational data, camera recordings, more people were watching it, and more people were watching it for longer. But we do know, based on, and I'm sure a lot of you know, museum research shows a certain length that people do watch videos and will hold and watch videos. So we were able to kind of throw in those logistical information when creating the next video with Gamble, Alaska. But it was our survey with our volunteers and our staff that really kind of blew us away. As we know, if you work with educators or if you are an educator, taking the opportunity to discuss what's working or to share stories is usually taken. Those opportunities are usually taken. So a lot of our open-ended questions ended up being stories and conversations that our staff and our volunteers were having at the exhibit. Meaningful conversations and tips for new people being trained in it and new people at the exhibit. And so inadvertently, we knew we wanted to create this type of community, but it actually came out through a survey where we actually started having these discussions on things that are working in ways that people are starting to feel empowered to have these conversations. And really quickly, since I came back, I've been working with the communities that we had partnered with initially and working with their tribal councils as much as possible. We stay connected as much as possible through distance learning technology. We have a whole studio at the zoo where we do programs all over the world, and thankfully in our rural communities they can have some pretty good Wi-Fi and pretty good internet connection. So I really wanted to highlight Point Lay which is where Cully, the polar bear, was orphaned and rescued. And he spent a night at the school, and the kids just fell in love with him, and he became their bear. And so they named him after their community, so his name is Cully. And ever since he got to the zoo, every school year, I have an amazing school contact. She's one of the teachers there, Cerise Grist, and she keeps the kids connected to Cully as much as possible. So the kids actually get to see Cully live. We take an iPad to Polar Bear Point, and they actually get to see their bear. And the first time they saw him was just amazing, because they were thinking of this little fluff ball that they sent to U.S. Fish and Wildlife, and they saw this massive bear. He's huge. He's a really big bear, and it was just, oh my goodness, he's so big. They could not get over it. And another time we were there, because the keepers are the ones actually facilitating this. I'm just in the studio getting to watch all this cool stuff happen. The keepers get to tell the kids how Cully's doing and how the bear that they love is being loved at the zoo and being cared for at the zoo. And one of the keepers noticed a crowd around them, and so she kind of turned and explained to the crowd that these are kids from the community where Cully is from. And the kids and Miss Chris just jumped at the camera and were saying hi to everybody and saying, hi, we're the kids from Alaska. We're here, we're from Point Lay. And it was just, again, I'm in the studio just watching all this happen, and it was really cool, really amazing to witness. So what's next? Just keep swimming. We're just gonna keep working really hard with our partnerships, with our amazing partners and colleagues, and working with our guests and everybody, our learning community at the zoo that's been doing an amazing job. I am continuously inspired and motivated to keep going. So thank you so much.